Good morning, beautiful souls, and welcome to Bridge the Gap. I am your host, Nikki Steinhauer, and I hope that you are all having a beautiful day with your wonderful life, just as I was when I was living in Alabama. Come with me as we continue to explore my journey. So, there I was living in Alabama. I was able to escape the ongoing struggles and limitations of the military. I was able to have my family together for the first time. And even though all of this happened at the beginning of COVID, I was still able to establish my boundaries, work on my health as I was focusing on the foods that I was feeding my body and focusing on the workouts that I was doing, as well as the meditations that was just bringing peace to my mind. I was able to build those beautiful connections with my family, with my children, with my husband, and again, finally, with my siblings on a level that we were never able to connect at before. We bought a new house where I expanded my vision, my consciousness, and my sense of self as I made this house our home. Everything seemed to be going very well. So, do you guys remember that duplex that I built with my dad with my military bonus? We're going to back up our timeline just a smidge and kind of go over what happened with that. My husband and I, we weren't too sure what we wanted to do with that duplex after everything had happened with my mom and us moving out and buying a new house and all of these things. Okay, so we're backing up our timeline back to when we were in Texas. My dad said that he wanted to just sell the house and my husband and I wanted to buy him out. Numbers were thrown around, ideas were presented, but nothing was set in stone for the longest time. My husband and I finally decided that we wanted to rent out our side of the duplex. Again, there were many plans that were thrown around, but my husband and I saw the house as an investment. So after the initial freak out of, let's cut all ties here, let's sell the house in that frantic panic mode, we finally calmed down once my mom left to Alaska, and we decided that we wanted to keep the house. We wanted to take the equity and build another duplex. The whole time that we built the house, we were trying to move forward with this plan that we had decided that we were going to do in the beginning before we even built this first one. But this time, because of all the tension and my dad breaking away, we were just going to take the equity out and pay off my dad. But my dad never put my name or my husband's name on the deed. And even after paying the title company and scheduling multiple appointments for him and even online appointments, he always found a way to make an excuse of why he couldn't make the appointment. Even when it was set on a date and time that he said he was available. Even when we tried getting his side rented for him, he refused to let us be on the deed or help him in renting his side of the house with the rental company that we were using. It was red flags everywhere. But guys, the whole time that we were building this house, I trusted my dad, even though he kept trying to say that me and my husband were going to screw him out of money. Looking back and doing a lot of reflection and healing, I realize now what my dad was doing was something that is called psychological projection. And psychological projection is just a mechanism that was first described by Sigmund Freud, and it's a projection that occurs when people attribute their own unacceptable feelings or thoughts or behaviors to avoid confronting them in themselves. And research in psychology has shown that projection is a common defense mechanism. So, for example, someone who is dishonest may accuse other people around them of lying because they are unconsciously projecting their own behavior onto other people. And this helps them avoid guilt and cognitive dissonance. There's also been studies that were published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology that found that people who were primed to think about their own dishonesty were more likely to perceive dishonesty in other people. So this just supports the idea that projection is a way to externalize their internal conflicts. So again, a few examples of this would be a cheating partner might accuse their significant other of infidelity, even without evidence. And this is just something that I had seen growing up as well with my parents. But this accusation serves as a way to deflect suspicion from their own behavior. We also see this in politics when leaders or groups accuse their opponents of corruption or unethical behavior, while engaging in those same acts themselves. And this tactic is often used to manipulate public perception, to protect a narcissist's fragile ego and the way that the world perceives them. So when my husband and I asked my dad to put us on the deed to be able to rent out our side of the house, he would just say things like, leasing companies don't own what they're renting. You have text to prove that you own that side of the house. Why do you have to prove anything to a renter? I've never asked anyone, do you own this house on paper? Nobody says, I'm renting this to you because I own it. They just say, I'm renting this to you and it's a contract between me and you. I was very persistent. You guys know me. I am all about doing the right thing. I was very persistent about getting put on the deed. So I just said, I just need everything to be legal because if I rent to somebody, then we sell the house and they ask for the lease and it's under my name, they can throw out whoever is in the house because it's not with the owner. And they can be like, well, we don't know who you made this contract with, but it wasn't the previous owner, etc. All these things. And I don't need something coming up and biting me in the ass later. I told him that everything was beginning to stress me out. And he, of course, played the victim and was like, you? So I said, yes, I have money invested. I have absolutely no say in anything because you won't put me on the deed. I can't do things legally and you keep avoiding doing so. So in my eyes, I'm basically screwed out of my money, screwed out of my house because I have nothing legal to claim ownership and do this properly. This is why in the beginning, I told you that I don't trust anyone. So I told him I need this house either sold now or to buy you out so I can continue my investments. I'm at a standstill financially because of this house. I said, we are probably going to be moving in February, hopefully, and I need all of this done before then. I can't continue to play these guessing games or have to make decisions on what ifs. I need something a little bit more tangible, a little bit more stable and concrete. But he would always ignore my texts. And when he did finally text me days later, he would always just change the subject. I wasn't able to get anything signed by my dad, and I never got put on the deed. But I wasn't going to have my side of the house just sit there when I could actually be making some money off of it. So in December, I asked to be put on the deed once again, but my dad refused, saying I didn't need to be put on the deed and I don't have to prove that I own the house in order to rent it out. We went around and around in circles, just talking about the verbiage of the contract and all of these things and what I should give to my new potential tenant and everything like that. We couldn't agree upon anything. So at this point, I pretty much just crossed my fingers and I ended up renting out my side on January 1st. My dad had signed a contract with a real estate agent and he had told me that his contract was only until April 14th and that we would have to do the transfer of the deed once his contract ended with his real estate agent. So that made me feel a lot better. But in the meantime, while we were waiting for the contract to end with his agent, I pretty much just crossed my fingers, hoping that my dad wasn't lying, and I ended up renting my side, again, like I said, on January 1st. Even though I had my guard up, I was still trying to help out my dad. After all, it wasn't him who ruined our situation, it was my mom. But my mom had already moved to Alaska, and my dad kept traveling from Alaska to New Jersey and began to spend less and less time at the duplex, which it was understandable. I kept my distance as I was going through my healing during this time. And, his wife, my mom, she moved to Alaska. So, of course, he wanted to go see her and be with her. And he wasn't working too much down in Texas. So I just said, why don't you rent out your side of the duplex, especially because you're not spending as much time down here? I figured it would help him out financially instead of it just being an empty house. I even had a person lined up for him to move in May. But my dad continued to put off the rental process, and I'm not really too sure why. A few months go by. It's the end of April, so I asked my dad again to put me and my husband on the deed since the contract with the real estate agent ended, and we're getting close to being the 30 days after the contract ended, so we wanted to start the process again of getting put on the deed. but there was continuous avoidance and changing of the subject every single time that we spoke about it. I did also think that it was very odd at the time, but my dad continued to buy both me and my children a whole bunch of stuff. And he had packages consistently being sent to my house every few weeks. Something that I noticed that when I look back at the whole situation, I realized that his gift giving was actually a warning sign. You might ask yourself, how could gift giving be a warning sign? Gift giving can sometimes serve as a psychological or a social tool to mask guilt, to mask dishonesty, or even unethical behavior. And this behavior is rooted in the concept of moral licensing and impression management. When it comes to moral licensing, research in behavioral psychology suggests that people engage in moral acts, such as gift giving, to offset or license immoral behavior. For example, a study in psychological science found that individuals who performed a good deed were more likely to justify unethical actions afterwards. When it comes to impression management, showering people with gifts can be an attempt to control how others perceive them. This is particularly relevant in this case because it's where someone feels guilty or wants to appear generous despite underlying dishonesty. So an example of this is just through, we'll say, a relationship. A partner who is unfaithful, they might give extravagant gifts to their significant other to alleviate their guilt or to distract their significant other from their behavior. And this aligns with the idea that gifts can serve as a Trojan horse to mask ulterior motives. We could also see this in the corporate world as bribery, in business. Gifts are sometimes used as a form of bribery to influence decisions while maintaining the appearance of generosity. So at the time, this was not a red flag at that moment because I was unaware of what was happening. But it all makes sense now that he wanted to control the way that I saw him as a moral person, as a loving, giving person who was generous, and that would never be doing something sneaky behind my back. So August rolled around and my dad had just told us that he had gotten an offer on the house. And I had reminded my dad that me and my husband agreed on paying him out, and our payout was more than what the offer he just got was. I joked around saying, "You want to take less?" And he had said that I had a bad memory and said that I only offered him a less amount of what the person is offering and told me to look back at my texts. So when I sent him a screenshot of the text proving that I said what I said about my offer, he called me a bitch. But I just laughed it off and he replied, "I thought you didn't save anything." And then he told me that he was joking about the offer. I told him, I hope that he wasn't joking about the offer because I already told my husband about the offer already. And then my dad said, "It's a bogus offer." And then he continued to tell me all these stories about how he thought his real estate agent must have thought he was dumb and was playing games with him, just giving him a pretend offer and like all of these things. I just want to stop for a second and let you guys know that evil always has a way of telling you what it's going to do. And this can happen either directly or indirectly, either consciously or unconsciously. And this concept also ties to the importance of discernment and heightened intuition during fight or flight responses. So research in nonverbal communication shows that people often leak their true intentions through body language, tone of voice, or even subtle cues, even when they're trying to hide them. This is why intuition can sometimes pick up on these signals. This is called unconscious leakage. And then during fight or flight mode, the brain's amygdala becomes highly active, enhancing our ability to detect threats. This heightened state of awareness can make us more attuned to the subtle cues that reveal someone's true intentions. Studies on psychopathy have often shown that manipulative individuals often reveal their plans indirectly, relying on their target's inability to discern their true motives. And this aligns with the idea that evil can sometimes tell you what it plans to do, either in a subtle or in a coded way. In literature and even real life villains, they often reveal their plans either out of arrogance or as a way to psychologically manipulate their victims. An example of this would be a manipulative person might say to you, "You'll regret trusting me," as a veiled warning. This can also come as an indirect revelation through subtle hints such as changes in behavior, their tone, or actions. It can signal someone's harmful intentions. For example, a coworker who plans to sabotage you or your projects, they might start asking you unusual questions about your work or your schedule. But in my situation, when I was speaking to my dad in a joking manner, he straight out told me. He revealed his plan in a manner that I thought was just joking, but he was 100% serious. So, let's say that I was going to buy my dad out for $100 for this house, and he agreed. When we were texting back and forth, he threw in random texts saying, "I'll still take $100. Remember, these aren't real numbers. But I thought he was just joking. So I said, "Nope, it's going to go down every month. We're not on the deed," meaning, his buyout payment was going to go down. I said, "You just need to put us on the deed, and then our name has to be on it for 6 months, and then we can take the equity out. Your contract with the realtor should have ended in April. You canceled with her. We waited 30 days. Then we can do the deed transfer. And then 6 months later, we will pay you." I was like, "You could have been getting your money at the end of October, but you're just sitting on it," just joking around with him. Again, I am thinking we are just joking around about him screwing me over. He then replies with, "I'm just going to sell it for $105 and take $100. Again, fake numbers, but he was still undercutting me, and he kept saying the same amount of money of what he was going to take away, as if he had a set number that he was going to leave off of making money off of this house, regardless of what was left. So it turns out that he was more serious than I had thought. He was literally telling me how much he was going to screw me over, giving me the exact numbers and everything. And this is why he was able to defend his position and stick to his story of, "I never lied to you," because in a weird roundabout way, he didn't. He straight out told me how much money he was going to be walking away with, even if it was nowhere near the original 50% when we first began planning everything. So a few more months go by, and my dad finally agreed and thought it would be a good idea to finally put his house up for rent, or at least that's the story he told me and my husband. He had said that, "You're right, he should be making some money off the house, off of his side, so since no one was living there, it's just an empty space." So in October, I agreed to help him out. I flew out to Texas for a few days to help him pack up all of his belongings and get his house together to be rented. I helped my dad pack up all of his stuff. I hauled it to the storage. I completed and fixed the rest of the things on his side of the duplex, and I got it set up, and I completely cleaned it out and got it ready to be shown and rented out. In just 2 days, I was able to help my dad move all of his stuff to storage. I repainted walls, I recaulked, I put up a whole fence. There's so much more that I did to get his side of the duplex ready to be rented out, because the new agreement was to allow my dad to be able to rent out his side until we were financially ready to buy him out. After I got back home, my dad had messaged me and asked me to make sure that I reached out to the rental company and to be sure that I was CC'd on all of the emails so that we would know that she was sending us the emails and all the documentation over, because he doesn't check his junk mail and he didn't want to overlook it or miss it. So I reached out to her. I asked her to CC me on all the emails. And then about a week later, I did a follow-up with my dad to see if he got the contract yet from the rental company. And he had all kinds of issues with the way that their contract was worded, and he didn't agree with everything that was in their contract. So he never signed with them. Looking back now, I know why he made all of these excuses and he said the contracts were no good. It was because he couldn't go under contract with them to rent out the house because it would go against the contract that he still had with his real estate agent. You know, the one that he was supposed to be done with 6 months ago. But I didn't know that at the time. So I just thought my dad was being stubborn and cheap. Now, if you ever rented a house before, you know that your company is just the middleman and they will never take responsibility if your tenant damages the home. But my dad would not sign unless they changed the wording to them being liable for damages and having to pay for any damages, not my dad. So if the tenant isn't able to pay, he wanted the rental company to pay for the damages. And if you know how they work, they are just not going to accept that verbiage and responsibility. Again, I just thought my dad was being his usual cheap self, so I thought nothing of it, except he was dumb for not renting out his side. The last day of October, 20 days after I helped my dad fix up his side of the duplex, my dad had asked me if I had a written lease with my tenant and what the terms were. So I disclosed all the information to him, thinking he was just going to keep trying to put his side up for rent, possibly privately or something like that. And he began asking, what's included with my side and any additional details like a washer, dryer, things like that. Again, I thought nothing of it. I definitely didn't think he was going behind my back, giving all of this information to his real estate agent that he never canceled with. November rolled around just 3 days after giving him all the information on my side. My dad texted me saying someone wanted to inspect both units and give a bid. He asked, if this guy's bid is doable, are you okay with me selling? I replied with, I thought you took it off the market, where he just replied, 30-day notice. Confused because we were almost 7 months past the time he gave his 30-day notice, I just replied with, what are we calling doable? And he said, close to asking. Again, guys, he wasn't lying per se when he was giving me these short responses. He just wasn't giving me the full truths. He did email a 30-day notice to his agent. He just never canceled the contract like he had made me and my husband believe he did. He then began to tell me that he had received 6 offers in the last 2 months and they were all ridiculous. Me, still confused, just thought that either my dad was getting offers from the people on the jobs he was doing or some people that he knew, or his old agent really liked the house and just kind of kept it in her back pocket and was directly contacting my dad with offers from some of her clients to see if my dad was still interested in selling. I had said, we would be okay with selling, but it would have to be at the right price, and that our tenant's lease agreement would have to be still in place. Again, I was under the impression that these were just random people throwing out random offers, nothing to do with a real contract with a real estate agent. It was one of those, yes, everything is for sale for the right price kind of thing, not being really serious. The way my dad basically told us that he was no longer interested in renting out his side of the duplex was by saying, I've reached out to 3 rental company places and they all say they won't change the contract wording. I guess in his mind, that was sufficient enough communication to tell us that he was no longer renting out his side of the house. A whole month and a half later go by, and you guys know that I was at my new house. I was still learning things. I was going through my spiritual awakening. I was connecting with my spirituality and my intuition and my gifts and just trying to enhance them during this time. So something in my intuition, in my connection, had told me to look at Zillow and to look at the duplex that we were selling. I thought it was just a bizarre thing that came through kind of out of nowhere, especially because for the whole month and a half, me and my dad never spoke about the duplex again. So I just went on to Zillow and I looked at the house, what could it hurt? And I saw that the house was showing pending. I spoke to my husband and I asked him, would there be any other reason besides someone being under contract that Zillow would be showing pending? And he said, nope, not that I know of. So a whole month and a half went by. And then all of a sudden, I get this intuitive hit from my spiritual team to look at Zillow. And I am completely shocked at what I saw. So I did what I thought I should do. I simply texted my dad and asked him if he accepted an offer on the duplex. He replied with, "I told you about the people throwing an offer at me and thinking that it was fake." So I replied, "So you didn't accept an offer because on Zillow it says pending." He kind of changed the subject a little bit and he began to tell me about how his house in New Jersey was showing pending for over a year. So I just said, "Okay, I was just asking because before it said for sale and now it says pending." He said, "So did the other house. It would say under contract." So I just said, "Okay, I was just asking." And then he replied with, "If it sells, you'll be the first one to know." I did think that change of verbiage was just a little off because he was always telling me when something happens, if we get an offer, you'll be the first one to know, things like that. This time he said, "If it sells, you'll be the first one to know." So again, I thought that was a little odd on that verbiage, but I tried not to think too much into it because he said he did not accept an offer. A few days go by and he had messaged me a message from his real estate agent saying that the lender had finally found an appraiser and he was hoping to go to the house to see both sides. She said that she had no way of contacting the tenants, so could my dad help her determine if it was okay for the appraiser to come out the next day? The real estate agent also said that the buyer is still asking her if the tenant is wanting to stay after the first of the year. My dad sent me the screenshot of what this real estate agent sent him and then replied with, "Finally found? That's why it's fake." I had asked, "What was the offer again?" And he said a number that was about triple all of the other older verbal offers. So I had said, "You had never told us that offer." And then my dad responded with, "It was originally higher." And to go from all of these significantly low offers to around our asking price with the same agent just didn't seem realistic to me. So I had just laughed and said, "Yeah, okay, now I know this lady's messing with you." Especially because of all the stories that my dad was telling me around this lady. You know, it just didn't make sense that all of a sudden all of these super, super low offers and then bam, something that's triple what everyone is offering. It just didn't make sense. My dad then said it has to appraise for the offer or no sale. And then I had mentioned again, like I said, "You never mentioned that offer to me." He then said, "I got 6 offers previously, starting between, we'll just say $50 and $100. And so I had asked, so that was before I went there and fixed things to get it up for rent?" And he said, "No." So then I said, "So after I painted and everything, someone wants more fixes?" So then my dad responded with, "Yes, it seems someone never finished something that they said they were going to do." And I was like, "Which was?" And he was like, "Really?" And listed a whole bunch of things that only an inspector would notice. But for all I knew, it could have been an inspector or an appraiser or somebody making an offer. So I really didn't think too much of it, guys. I was too focused on healing myself and getting myself up spiritually that I was just kind of like, I don't really know what he's doing over here. Later that day, I messaged him back. I said, "Anything on that offer?" And he said, "Nothing yet." And so I asked him, "If you gave a 30-day notice to your agent, how is she still able to show the house? You gave her the 30-day notice about 2 to 3 months ago." Again, he did what he always did. He changed the subject and tried to start drama about my brother and his girlfriend. He did end up telling us on the phone that he thought he gave the 30-day notice, but then something happened where it didn't go through with email stuff. And so he was technically still under contract with his real estate agent. So I had said, "Okay, well, make sure you put in that 30-day notice to cancel with her." I had asked on the phone. It was just a 6-month contract and it should have ended automatically and not renewed. And he said that he was duped again, that it was actually a 12-month contract and a whole bunch of other lies. So I just said, "Okay, make sure you put in the 30-day notice so we can finally be done with this real estate agent. 2.5 weeks go by, and the company that I was going to use for my dad to help rent out his side of the duplex contacted me and had asked, what do you want to do with these keys that you spent a lot of money to overnight over here? Because this is when we were trying to get my dad's duplex up for rent on his side, so we sent the keys. We overnighted the keys to them so that they could start renting out my dad's side of the duplex. But then my dad refused to sign the papers. And now all of a sudden, because he just realized that he's still under contract with his real estate agent, that he cannot have any changes to his contract with her. So I reached out to him asking, do you want us to just put it in our name so you can start collecting rent or something? Like, I don't know what to do because it'll be the same thing as what I'm doing on my side. 3 days go by without a response, and he finally messages me back and says, why would you sign a contract that the realtor said wasn't good? At this point, I'm just so over all of the stories and his lies. So I just kind of roll my eyes and I'm like, am I having her send my keys back? And so he had said he had already told her to send the keys to him. Granted, these were my keys for the duplex. My dad had a set and I had a set. My dad said that he didn't have the funds to overnight his key. So I said, it's not a big deal. I'll overnight my key to her so you don't have to worry about it. Not thinking that I was literally giving up my keys to the entire duplex. Another week goes by. My dad texted me to get my tenant's name and phone number to get some information from her so he could add insurance to his side of the duplex so he can get his side rented out finally. He even said that he had to put insurance on his side of the duplex because he was dealing with all of that scam shit. And so his insurance company was asking him if he was renting his side and had all of these things. So I said, okay, I had reached out to my tenant to get permission to give out her information. And she had known my dad from when he was still living there. And she's like, yeah, sure, not a big deal. I'll help him out. My dad messaged me saying she's probably going to be contacted by them and the inspector for them. So I had replied, the inspector for home insurance? When I spoke to my dad on the phone, he was saying something about forking out a bunch of money for a potential buyer for an inspection, and they had made a list of demands to fix things, and if we didn't fix them, that the inspector was going to go bring all the fixes to the city. Like this whole insane thing. I was just like, okay, I don't know what is going on here. So I had replied to him just extremely confused. What money did you fork out if the potential buyer had the inspection? You don't pay for that. And if the inspector did bring it to the city, they can't make you change anything, even if you were trying to sell the house, which we aren't. It all passed inspection when we built the house, so I don't understand what you're paying for. And the insurance company didn't call my tenant. Some random guy claiming he is closing on the house in 2 days called her and asked her if she wanted to stay in the house so they can discuss the terms. I said, things just aren't adding up and I'm trying to make sense of it all. So then he said, I'll contact you after work. You're catching me on a very busy Monday. So I just said, okay. Again, not thinking that anything shady's going on behind the scenes. A few hours later, my tenant called me frantically saying someone called her and said that she was getting evicted and she would have to move out. And I was like, what the heck? So I told her, just give me a minute, that, all of this must be a misunderstanding and that I would get back to her. She sent me a picture of a for sale sign in the front of the house, but my dad said that it was there because he was selling the other lots that he had owned that were next to our duplex. And he said that the real estate agent must have placed it too close to the house. Again, I assured my tenant that she would not be getting evicted from the house and that I would call her back to see what was going on because I wanted to see where the miscommunication was coming from. So I reached out to my dad again and he didn't respond. So I told him, please call me as soon as possible because my tenant is freaking out about a phone call that she got earlier and I had no answers for her. My dad didn't respond until the next day. And then he told me that he would call me at lunch and then texted, And admittedly, I was duped into getting the tenant's info and feel stupid about it. As soon as I read these words, I was furious because I just gave out all of my tenant's information and my dad was telling me he was duped into giving it to some random person. So I responded, I don't understand. How did you get duped by your insurance company about getting my tenant's information? I'm also going to need the name of the insurance company because I'm going to look into filing a lawsuit against them for giving out my tenant's information. If there's anything going on with that house, please tell me. He had said, I thought the guy was from the insurance company because he mentioned insurance. I told you I was having a very busy Monday as I'm having a very busy Tuesday. I thought the guy was from the insurance company and he wasn't. The real estate company asked me for the tenant's information numerous times and I refused to give it. So I guess the guy got my phone number and mentioned having to get insurance and needing the tenant's information. Again, the information that he gave me was so broad and unspecific that I thought the guy he was talking about was the guy from the insurance company, not some random guy who bid on our house. So I had said, so you weren't changing your insurance to rental insurance? Some random guy just called you out of the blue, asking you for my tenant's information, and you just gave it to him? That doesn't scream scam? And he said, because I was switching to a different policy for having a rental, I thought they were calling for additional information. So I asked, does he work for the real estate company? And then my dad had said, supposedly the guy it was putting an offer on the house. So I said, so this random guy who put in an offer on the house, which we never accepted, is asking you for my tenant's information. Should I be filing a restraining order? And he replied with, I told you I thought it was a scam, so I accepted the offer to see how far this was going to go. I spoke to you about this and I said, what if it sells? And you told me that if money from the house shows on your taxes, it's going to screw you up. So this has been going on for 3 months now. Do you guys like how he just sneakily put that into his text messages, so later on he could say, I told you it was going on for 3 months. And I love how he's playing dumb because the conversation that we had about the taxes that were going to screw me up that he's referencing here was if I put his rental in my name and I paid all the taxes on it while he collected all the profit. It's crazy how he picks and chooses what items and what words belong to what scenarios. So I replied with, did you call the realtor and cuss her out for giving out your information to some random dude? He replied with, my phone number's on the internet, and yes, I did complain to the realtor and she said I'm terribly sorry. What he's not telling me and disclosing to me was that she was not terribly sorry about the random guy reaching out to a tenant and things like that. She was terribly sorry to be causing issues and doing things without my dad knowing the full story. She was sorry for not telling him about the new closing date. So I said, wait, what? You never told me you accepted the offer and we were talking about taxes on your side of the rental. If we put it under my name with the rental company, you never told me you accepted an offer and that the house was being sold. So I guess now we can't buy you out like we agreed? He did not respond, so I replied with, so this guy is closing tomorrow on the house. He said, yesterday was the first time I heard about a closing for this 15th, and that was from you. I contacted the real estate lady and she said that she thinks it's in the works. So I said, okay, so what was the offer? And how can she say that she thinks it's in the works? She's the agent and she knows both sides of the parties at all times and she can see the whole process. How does she think? That makes no sense. And my dad responded with, I've never been contacted by the title company. The title company normally contacts everybody asking for more information, etc. I'll know better today at lunch. I told him the title company's never going to contact the seller or the buyer. They go through the realtors. They will never contact you. He then responded, well, if it's not a scam, you'll have your down payment for your next house. I was so confused, but my intuition was screaming at me. I looked online and I saw that the house was still up for sale, still pending, but my dad had said if he had got an offer, I would be the first to know. So I just did some logical and spiritual recon, and I had found out that my dad was selling the house from under me and had been under contract for almost 2 months. I had found out the guy's name, who he was. We'll just call him Bob at this point. That he was from New York. I found out how much the offer was for, the fixes that were requested, the closing date, the day the offer was accepted, all of the information. And all this information was 100% confirmed through various sources. So I was beyond mad at this point. But I wanted to see how far my dad would take his whole charade. I was pissed. I'm not going to lie. I was pissed. So I messaged my dad. So what was the offer? He told me, and then he sent a different offer as if he didn't really know what the real offer was. So I said, so what was the agreed price? You had to sign a paper stating the offer in detail to get this far. Is that why you said you were putting out all this money? He said, I only put about $450 out, which I don't like putting money out. With no repairs other than electrical, they gave me a whole list. So I had said, so can you send me all of this paperwork that you never told me about, or email traffic that was going on because you never told me that you were fixing anything? He said, I tried to do the email traffic last night, but I fell asleep. The whole time he was making excuses of why he couldn't send me or forward me the email traffic of all of the documents and everything that was going on. And something was always coming up about it. So I texted him and I said, it took a random guy calling my tenant for me to know anything or question you because you told me I would know everything that's going on with the house. He messaged me back saying, you make me feel like you guys are just sitting around talking about all the times that I've screwed you out of money, and this is going to be an additional time. Do you see how he's trying to play the victim here? So I just said, if the closing's at least a month away on the high side for closing, you should know what the selling price is, what the taxes are, what the closing costs are going to be. Do you remember any of those numbers from the contract? Because again, he was having issues trying to send it to me. I said, I never accused you of screwing me out of money, but I do feel like you're being very sneaky behind my back with everything. I said, this guy is saying that he's closing tomorrow, and I had no idea. And I said, I never said the 15th. So now that we are on that topic, how do I know you're going to give me my buyout or my half? And exactly how much? How am I going to be getting my money? He said, that's exactly what I said. You're just remembering all the times that I ripped you off and think it's going to happen again. I haven't ripped you off. That's why I'm saying I didn't know anything. Nobody gave me a list of anything except for repairs. You told me yesterday that your tenant said the guy's closing on the 15th. And I said, that's impossible. If that's the case, you can sue the fuck out of your agent. But I know you, and if this guy is closing, you had to have signed a contract. That's why you're doing repairs, to uphold your part of the contract. I know you read everything you sign. I know your agent didn't just give you some random repair list and you blindly started to fix things. He said, I never said that. So I said, I have no objection of you selling at that price, but it's the being blindsided that I care about. He said, I accepted the offer and was waiting to see where it was going. Having conversations with somebody that never remembers the last thing they said makes it difficult. Do you guys see the gaslighting here? You always swear you told me something you never told me, and I'm the one being blindsided and feel stupid because of that phone call yesterday. I think I should have known about the 15th before the tenant did. Again, not feeling bad that he didn't tell me, but saying that he feels stupid because he didn't know about the closing on the 15th before the tenant did. Again, more gaslighting, and more victimization. I said, I don't think you're going to rip me off, but how are you going to send me my money? And how much are you going to be bringing me? Again, my spiritual team had already told me that he was not going to be honoring the 50%, the half that we had originally agreed upon because we had 50% ownership and that we were going to get 50% of the sale price. Even though me and my husband put in way more money to build that house than my father did, as well as paid all of the bills the entire time that we were living at that house together. My dad avoided that question by saying the title company will have to give me a detailed expenditure list. He said, I know 19% is out right off the bat. And having sold a home in Texas before, I know what the percentages are, what the real estate agent fees are, and I've been through that process already. So I had said 5% for each realtor. What's the other 9% for? He said, what kind of stupid math is that? 14% real estate tax unless it's higher or lower down there. So I said, so you agreed to pay 7% to each agent for commission? I'm just not understanding the 19%. He said, did you not read 14% real estate tax and 5% realtor plus property tax and or prorated taxes? So then I replied with, so you settled for less than what we were going to buy you out at? Also, I am required to give my tenant a 30-day notice of change of landlord, or she can sue me. So can you please call your realtor and let me know if the house is being sold? Because at this point, he was still unsure. He sent me a screenshot of his conversation with his realtor, who said that the documentation was going to be going out on the 14th. And that was in just a couple of days. That was 2 days away. And so I replied to my dad, so I have 2 days to notify my tenant of the change. Who is paying if I get sued? And does it say in the contract that her current contract is acknowledged or no? Is that why he is calling her? He ignored all of my questions and just said, you have her as a month to month, not much of a contract. So I replied with, this is why I'm pissed. I just got done telling her yesterday that everything is okay and there's nothing to worry about. Don't worry. I'll make sure I give you the 30 days notice because you told me that everything was okay. Now I have 2 days notice and it doesn't matter how long the contract's for. It's still a contract. After her initial 6 months, it turned into a month to month. Now I can't honor our contract and I'm about to get sued to all hell. And he just replied, no. I said, no to what? Explain to me how everything is laid out. I need either you or your real estate agent to send me the contract within the hour so I know exactly what's going on, so I'm not getting screwed over. If I don't have it, I will have to call Bob, the buyer, directly to see what he intends to do with my tenant because I'm not trying to get screwed over or screw her over. He said, I don't understand all of this getting screwed over stuff. And who said the tenant's getting evicted? I said, I find it hard to believe that there's 2 days to closing and you have no idea what's happening. He said, you can think what you want, but I swear to God, I did not know. He said the original contract was for November something and then December 2nd and then January date for closings. That's why I thought it was a scam. And then there was another one right before Christmas. So I just responded, I just find it hard to believe that in 12 hours, I find out that Bob, the buyer from Bronx, New York, has been under contract since November 26th and is awaiting underwriting to close on the house on the 13th of this month. And it is past his back out date, but you just found out all of this today. How am I supposed to believe that? And if my tenant didn't get a phone call, I wouldn't have known any of this was happening until after it was sold. So I don't see where I'm supposed to trust anything. Again, he simply responded, absolutely. I said, you have to sign a contract in order for him to get to underwriting. So last you told us was a verbal offer. What original contract are you speaking of? We were never told that you signed a contract. He said, I told you that I received many verbal offers, not that this one was a verbal. I accepted an offer for a quick closing, and they kept pushing the day off and pushing the date off. I already told you, that's why I thought it was a scam. First delay was he didn't have a bank. Second delay, couldn't find an appraiser. Third delay, couldn't find someone to underwrite. That's why I thought it was a scam. I just responded, you never told me you signed a contract. He said, I know I told you that this offer was in writing and the best one so far. Also, that I thought she was scamming me. And I told you that I'm going to run with it and see if it's a scam. I sent him all of the text messages and screenshots of when we spoke about this house. And I said, this was all that you said on it. And he said, when we talked, basically trying to say when we talked on the phone. I said, absolutely not. Like, there's no way. Then he tried lying and saying that my husband was in the background saying that he thinks it's a scam too. And I said, yes, when it was a verbal offer and when these offers were triple less of what this offer was. He said, no, I told you. She kept sending me verbal offers and I was ignoring them because they weren't in writing. And I said, that's why we said it was a scam and don't trust your agent until everything was in writing, because all of the stories that you kept making up around your real estate agent and how shady she was. And it was just, everything was telling us that she was doing things shady and wrong. And then I had asked, so when did this all go in writing? He said, whenever I told you I was going to run with it and see what happens. They put an offer in writing with stipulations. So I said, when were you going to tell me this? Over a month of information was not relayed to us, even though we were asking questions about it. He said, honestly, I thought it was all just going to stop and the person was going to back out just like the first written offer. I said, you told us you gave the agent a 30-day notice and she was making up verbal offers. That was the last thing that I heard because you kept avoiding the topic, which makes me think that you're intentionally blindsiding me. And he simply said, no. Then I said, I told you when I put it in writing in an email what my intentions were. She came up with an offer, which he never said to us at all. Then I said, you could have at least told me this was happening. They had to put down earnest money too. You never said that to me. There are so many steps that you could have informed me of. He said, I know, I'm sorry, but like I said, I thought it was a scam to keep the listing active. And I said, and for you to claim ignorance on everything is just unbelievable. I know you. If I don't have the contract by 1 today, I'm going to call Bob the buyer because I'm going to save my ass and not get sued and make sure my tenant is taken care of. He said, why wait? Call him. So I said, so you're withholding the contract from me. And then he told me to shut the fuck up. He said, I don't have it on me. I told you I left my iPad at home, which he never did. He always had his phone and his iPad with him. And I said, that's why I said, you or your realtor, call her and have her forward it to me, please. Listen, like I said, I'm okay with selling. I just need to cover my ass, which you of all people should understand. I'm not trying to mess up the process, but I need answers and clarity on the situation. He said, I hear you. If I have a heart attack today, it's your fault. So I said, so can you please call her and have her send me the contract? How do you think I feel? I have to back channel everything to get information. Again, he just kept saying, let me see if I can get it for you when he was home with his iPad. And I kept saying, but for real this time, not like you keep saying you're going to do and I never get anything. At this point, I wanted to start showing my dad how much I actually knew about the contract, so maybe he would start being more honest with me. So I messaged him. He is trying to charge her more for rent. Talking about the buyer. Again, there was more avoidance and not sending me the contract and all of the things. So I said, okay, if I call, we're just going to call her Sue, the real estate agent. I said, okay, so if I call Sue and ask her to send me a copy, she's going to have to call you and get your permission. Can you answer when she calls and give her permission? Still, no answer from my dad. He finally responded that he had the documents on his DocuSign, and as soon as he gets to his email, he's going to send it to me. I said, you have your email and your DocuSign on your phone. He's like, I have my passwords. They're written down, not shared in between devices, which my dad would never write down his passwords. So I just started laying everything out that I knew about Bob the buyer. And I said, Bob the buyer is supposed to be calling me back to talk about my tenant situation because she has to move out now because she can't afford his new rent. I need to know what the contract says so I can have an educated discussion with him about the situation. We are trying to have everything figured out before he flies out to Texas in a few days. And I can't believe he's never seen the house in person. I guess he's trying to fly out tomorrow to look at it before the closing on the 14th, which was just in a couple of days. After sending my dad some additional information, he finally started to send me some portions of the contract. He sent me cropped out pictures with big black boxes on them covering portions of the contract. He started to send me the stuff so I wouldn't reach out to the real estate agent. But I continued to say, can you please stop sending me edited versions of all of this stuff? I want unedited versions, not these screenshots that are being sent out of order, half-paged, and all kinds of crazy. When I was reading through the bits and pieces of paper that he was screenshotting and sending to me, I had said, so he had signed this on November 1st, and you didn't tell me that you got a verbal offer until December 16th. But it was already a signed contract. And you were originally supposed to close on November 26th. Where are the prepaid portions? Where's the closing costs? And where does it state the percentages? Can you please just send me the full contract and all the supporting documents to my email? And then I had provided my email address. He kept ignoring me, so I was giving him more information than I knew. I said, so the offer was for, blank amount, or was it worked down to this amount after the inspection? I kept saying, hello, can you please respond? Can you please send me all of the paperwork for the house? After him not responding, I just said, so you're just going to ignore me again? He started sending me bits and pieces of the old original contract and nothing of the new ones. So then again, I just started laying out information. He continued to send me cropped versions of these old contracts, and I kept saying, I don't want these edited versions. Stop cropping them and editing them. I want the original documentation. And he was saying, this is the only way I know how to send it, which I know for a fact was not true. And I said, you can save it to your files on your phone or your iPad and send it to my email directly. I said, stop playing dumb. And he gave me the thumbs down. And since he was having such a difficult time sending me the contract, I said, okay, so then give me the password for it. Give me the password for your DocuSign so I can just access it. You claim you have nothing to hide. Give me the username and password for all the documentation. He then responded, I'm not going to spend another day of you insulting me. I said, really? Or another day of all your lies unfolding? You're stressed out because you can't keep your story straight. He said, name one lie. Tell me all the ways I've screwed you over. The only person making any money on this freaking house is you. And you have the nerve to say that I'm trying to screw you. So I had heard this one before. My dad saying that the only person making any money on this is me, not him. We ran into the same scenario when he helped me put a roof on a house. My dad had helped me put a roof on a house, and I told him that I would give him half of the money that I was making if he helped me. Some things went down because the people that I was working with did not listen to my heeds of warning. So there was a lot of damages that had happened, which forced us to spend an extreme amount of money over what we were supposed to be spending on the roof, which cut into our profits. My dad kept guilt tripping me, even though he was the one who said, no, it's fine, don't worry about it, when I was warning him. Because he didn't want to spend a couple dollars on some tarps. We ended up spending thousands of dollars on fixing the damages that had occurred. When everything was said and done, I gave my dad his money, in which he had told my siblings and a bunch of people that I screwed him out of. But what he apparently didn't realize is that I ended up giving him about $2,500 when me and my husband took home $500. because I felt guilty of having my dad help me do the work and not getting close to what I had originally said. I was trying to keep my word in the best way that I could. So instead of half of the money, I gave my dad significantly more than what both me and my husband together brought home. Yet he still complained that it wasn't the $3,000 that I had originally said that he would get. Even though, as I had said, we spent thousands of dollars of our profit to fix all of the mistakes that he told me don't worry about because he didn't want to spend a couple $100. Actually, I think it was less than $100 on a few tarps. Yet I still unproportionately gave him more. Yet I was the one who was ungrateful for the help, and I was the one who profited off of the roof, and he was the one screwed out of money. So he told other people. So hearing this word, or this phrase, I should say, of you're the only one profiting off of this, it may have triggered something of a defense mechanism within me. Like, first of all, as a parent, there is no way that I would be arguing with my child if they profited more than me. I'd be like, happy for them and cheer them on and be proud of them. I'm not a greedy person. So, this just wasn't the case here. Greed and selfishness around my dad. And, again, it just triggered something inside of me, another fight or flight mode episode. And I wasn't going to be the punching bag this time, all of his lies and deceit. So I straight out told him, listen, I already spoke to 2 real estate agents and some lawyers, and all I have to do to end this sale is to make 2 phone calls and the deal is off. I do not want to do this because I want to sell the house and just be done. You have not been upfront with me about any of this. You lied about the offer, the time frame, the offer amount, trying to get it rented, and you keep saying what I know you'll know, yet you can't even send me the contract. I do not trust anything you say, so I need to see the documents. Why are you withholding everything? And he said, sending you the contract is withholding, and I can't help that you don't have a memory. I told you that there was an offer. I told you I was going to write it out and see if it was a scam. Do you want to keep saying I never said it? Keep believing it. I said, sending me bits and pieces and edited portions of the contract is withholding, so yes. He said, do you want to have bad blood over this make-believe stuff you're thinking? Again, the gaslighting. And I said, I sent you the text of when you told me you got an offer on December 16th, but you already were supposed to close on November 24th. No, I want you to stop sneaking behind my back and finally be honest. He said, if you have the ability to read and comprehend, it says proposed closing date. Everything says proposed. I have not lied to you yet. I said, yes, because it can't have a final closing until it goes through underwriting. I know the process. Then he said, then why are you saying there was a closing date in November 24th? Everything says proposed. I said, because he signed the contract and you signed the contract November 1st. And you told me December 16th that you got a verbal. You obviously signed the contract. How is that verbal? And every time I asked you about it, you avoided me. He said, I never said this contract was verbal. I said, I got numerous verbal offers. You have a poor memory and you only hear what you want to hear. I said, okay. So then you disclosed to me that you got many verbal offers, then withheld the nonverbal offer. He said, now you're just being retarded. I said, then you tried telling me the offer was for this amount, but then maybe this amount. He said, actually, it was this amount is what I thought it was because I was going by their after realtor fee. I said, nothing in that contract shows your agent fee or wherever 19% came from. He said, you're still being retarded. 5% realtor fee and 14% realty sales tax. See, even after I told you that yesterday, you're acting like it wasn't said. I said, I asked for the breakdown and you never gave it to me. What is the real reason you're not sending me the documents? And again, when I said evil reveals itself, he says it straight up. He said, because I'm a lying thief that has been screwing you over for years. And I just think he's being sarcastic. But again, evil will show itself every single time. So I just roll my eyes and I said, what is the reason you're not sending me the documents? Again, ignored me. So I said, so ignoring me again. Also, 90% of X amount is this amount. So after paying taxes, we will be left with this amount. So I still don't see where your offer of this is coming from. And I said, if anyone is creating bad blood, it's you. I just don't understand, even being caught, and you're still denying everything. Last chance to come clean about everything. Still no answer. I said, I have 3 options. 1 before closing, which I prefer not to do, and 2 after closing. Ball's in your court. If I don't hear back by noon, then I know you're not willing to disclose all the information and I'll have to move forward. Still no answer. I said, correction. If I do not have all of the documents pertaining to the sale of the address via unedited, uncropped PDF in my email, I will have to move forward. Again, I gave him my email address. No answer, no response. I said, so if the electrical passes today and you sent in the receipts for the electrical repairs and Bob, the buyer, walks through and accepts everything, and we end up closing tomorrow, we are talking X amount sell price minus all the fees and everything. And so my half is going to be X amount. Agree? Still nothing. I said, are you just going to avoid me until after the walkthrough tomorrow at 12 or until closing? He said, why? Are you itching to insult me some more? I said, I just don't understand the avoidance. He said, I just don't understand the insulting and accusations. I said, I just don't understand the sneaking and half-truths. And then he stopped responding. A little bit later, I messaged him at noon for when the closing was. I said, how's the closing coming along? He said, not good. The fence is knocked over. And I said, okay, what's the plan? He's like, I don't know. We're waiting on responses. I said, do you need me to take care of it? I have contacts out of there. And he's like, I'm waiting to see what they say. So I said, okay, so once the fence is fixed, we should be good. And it was just like this whole big thing of, it was scheduled for the 14th, which is today. There was just a little bit of a delay because he still needed more answers. There was a walkthrough. Everything kind of got pushed off, and then inspections and things like that. So he kept asking me some more information. And I'm like, they were supposed to have the walkthrough at 12, then closing afterwards. Like, what happened? And so he starts asking me some more information about my tenant's rent and some adjustments. He's like, they're still doing some adjusting and whatever. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. What adjustments? And he's like, whatever they're discussing. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, they are discussing the adjustments with you. Like, I just don't understand. So again, he kept avoiding giving me information. I said, okay, if they're adjusting things, you'll have to re-sign and send the closing contract. What kind of time frame are we talking about? He said, I just sent in notarized paperwork and they want me to send them money through Venmo and they don't know how Venmo works. So I'm like, okay, are we talking another week? Or, did you just overnight the paperwork today? And he said that he just overnighted the paperwork. And I'm like, okay, they're not going to do the PDF for closing. Everything has to be wet signed. So when did you send the wet signed paperwork in? Just now? And he's like, no, the post office was closed, all these things. So what my dad wasn't disclosing was the paperwork that he had to re-sign was not actually something he had to sign. It was something that my mom had to sign. And I had found that out. So I had asked him, I said, so mom had to sign with a notary. Was she able to sign? So if the papers get there today, you should be funded by 10 o'clock. What is your plan for bringing me my half of my money? And again, he just ignored me. And he was just like, missing documents. And the thing is, I had reached out to my mom and asked her, did you know that my dad was selling my house from underneath me? And she swore on the lives of all of her children that she had no idea and all of these things. And I was shown that my mom had to get a notarized signature so that she didn't claim any of the profits and things on the house and like all these things. And basically saying that she didn't own the house. So my mom also went behind my back with my dad and lied to me about her knowing the whole time he was selling the house, signed paperwork and all these things, but still said to me, no, I had no idea. Your dad would never do that to you and things like that. And I'm just like, okay. The truth will reveal itself. So the house gets closed on, and I'm asking my dad, what's the plan for you coming here and giving me my half of the money and all of these things? So again, the house was closed on, everything was good. And I was trying to see how my dad was going to cash the check, or if it was direct deposit or whatever, and how he was going to give me my money. What my dad didn't realize was that I had spoken to multiple people that he had grown up with and lived with and things like that about this whole situation. And I had asked, do you think my dad would actually take my money from me? Because that was the message my guides were giving me, that he was not going to give me the 50% profit. And so I had reached out to many people, and they were all like, yeah, your dad screws over people all the time for money. Like, it's not new with him. That's what he does. He screws his employees over and all of these things. And I'm like, okay, so do you think he would do it to me? And they're like, honestly, I mean, every single one of them was like, well, honestly, it's just a natural thing that he does, but I would never think that he would do it to his own child. And I'm like, that was my thought. So I'm like, I'm hoping that he wasn't going to screw me out of my money. So then I just started asking, what is your plan? What is your plan after you cash your check? And he said, I'm taking it one step at a time. And I'm like, okay, are you giving me my half of the money? And he's like, I'm cashing the whole thing. And I'm like, of course, like, duh, why would you only cash half of it? But I'm like, yes, after you cash the whole check, are you going to give me my half of the check? And he's like, I don't understand a dumb question. Are you a hard up for money right now? Do you need me to Venmo you or something? And I'm like, I don't understand the avoidance of the question over and over again. He's like, because it's dumb. I said, you took away my income with the rental. So yes, my family will be struggling now. And he responded with, gay. I said, it's not dumb. It's a question you, for some sneaky reason, won't answer. And he goes, here we go again with the insults. I said, yes, it's so gay that you took money from my family. He said, so you don't want your portion of the money? I said, it has been over a week since closing, and you still have no idea what you're doing, or you're just not disclosing that information for some reason. You won't answer simple questions. I just don't understand the insult. Unless you're talking about taking my income behind my back, then trying to hold my half of the check, yes, that is an insult. Yes, I want half of my money, not portion, half. And then he continued to say, the person who has the least invested is always the one claiming to be the one being ripped off. All of his responses are just solidifying the messages that I've been getting with my spiritual team. I said, least invested? Really? So you are trying to scam me out of my half? He said, LOL, see, nothing has happened and you start accusing instantly. I see that you just want to argue, so I'm not going to entertain. I said, so if you're not scamming me, are you going to give me my half of the check? Again, he was avoiding, he didn't respond. So I said, okay, avoiding the question again. So you're not going to answer the question? And he said, you're creating a whole story in your head and asking me the same questions over and over. You just want to fight. I said, no, I want an answer. I want to know why you went behind my back and lied to me and accepted an offer and kept me in the dark until I found out 2 days before closing from a stranger. I want to know why you didn't ask me if I wanted to sell instead of our original plan of us buying you out. I want to know why you kept making up excuses for 2 years to not put us on the deed, which is obvious now, I guess. I want to know why you took money from my family and now I can't pay my bills next month. I want to know why you are trying to play dumb, why you won't answer any of my questions. You say, when I know, you'll know. So I guess you're still deciding if you're going to give me my half. You're the one creating drama. Will you or will you not be giving me my half of the money? He said, I already told you I'm giving you your money after I cash the check. I can't keep answering the same question just so you can argue with me. And granted, like I said, this has been a week after closing. So he had already gotten his money and done all these things. This is a week after closing. I said, you keep saying my money and avoid saying half, which makes me believe you're trying to scam me out of my half of my money. He said, the only one trying to scam someone is you. If I give you half of the money, then that means you expect me to pay all the taxes, all the fees, the rent that I just paid back. So who's scamming who? I'm done with this ignorant conversation. And I said, okay, now we are finally getting somewhere. So now we can finally have an adult conversation about it then, instead of you ignoring me. I said, what have you paid for that you're looking to get reimbursed for? I said, so that's $350 for the rent that you paid. What taxes and fees did you pay for? I said, you said $450 for electric repairs. I just need to see receipts for that. What else? Again, I'm messaging him. He's not responding anything. I said, so are we not discussing this? A whole day goes by. Did you end up going to Texas today, or are you going on Sunday? 3 days go by. He asks me for my routing and account numbers so he can send it to my account. Me stupidly, I give him my account and routing numbers and the name of my bank and everything. And I said, how are you depositing it into my account? He just kept saying, I don't know. The bank teller needs all this information. I said, who needs it? And he's like, maybe direct transfer or whatever they do. The bank needs the information. Don't stress out about keep looking at your account over and over. It won't happen until the end of business day. And I'm like, okay, well, any transfers or payments that go into my bank account, it usually shows pending right away, but then it's not going to be available until it clears. So I said, can you please send me the receipt from the bank teller? And then he just goes off on all the information that the lady gave me this morning was for somebody who had a bank account at their bank. So I have to deposit it into my bank account and then transfer it to you. So I said, okay, so then are you doing a transfer or are you just bringing me cash? He said, I was planning on bringing it to you, but then you guys made it bad. So if I transfer, I have a receipt and everything. So I said, okay, then you're going to deposit the check into your account and then transfer the money to my account. Is that your plan? Again, no answer. So I'm like, did you cash the check or deposit it? I will fly to New Jersey or to Texas. That way you can give me my cash. He said, I cashed it. I'm flying to Jersey now. So I said, okay, don't deposit my money. I will come up to New Jersey and get it. And again, at this point, because of his constant days of avoiding me and just the way he's been treating me and avoiding things, I'm pissed off at him. Like, honestly, I'm angry, infuriated, and in survival mode, still transitioning through these ascension and awaken processes. So he texts me and he goes, your tenant came home, so I rang the doorbell, but she didn't answer. I still have stuff in her crawl space. And I'm just like, okay, just to clarify, don't deposit my money. I'm going to fly to New Jersey to get it. So he had wanted to call me a see you next Tuesday, but he did not put the T at the end when he texted me back. So my dad says, make sure you tell me which day you're coming to be here so I can take it out. So I flew into New Jersey. My sister picked me up from the airport and I went to where my dad was staying at my brother's house. And my dad came home, we were there, and I said, hey, I'm here to pick up my money. And he basically said, I don't have the money on me. I have to go to my bank and get it. And then I have to give them notice and like all of these things. And I'm like, okay, cool. And he's like, okay, just meet me in my job the next day or at his bank. So that way he could give me the money. And I'm like, okay, I'm tired. I just traveled in. I am going to go back to my sister's and I'm going to go crash. And then I'll meet him at his work tomorrow and collect my money and be out of here. But he had messaged me at 4:00 in the morning saying, you do know it's weird that I asked you to tell me that you're coming so I could have the money out. Then you pop in with like a gotcha moment. You drove in heavy traffic just to come here and say, let's go home. I'm tired. That's just bizarre. And in other words, he was taken back that I would just show up and be in my power to take what was mine. And I said, it was last minute. I didn't think you put the money in your bank account yet. And he's like going off about how he doesn't trust my brother's house and things like that. So I'm like, okay, whatever, I understand. And he said, he had texted me saying, please come up with a number that you will be happy with so I know how much to take out. So I gave him a number, given all the portions and everything that he had given me with the taxes and stuff. I gave him a number significantly, I'm telling you, significantly less than half. That way, everything was taken care of and all the like bits and pieces and real estate tax and like all taxes, we gave him like thousands more after all that was paid off. And he responded with, so we are still not going to be realistic. So I said, that's less than half, and that is my number. He said, since you guys are hooked on this 50% thing, please write in detail the exact 50% that you guys gave. And I will write in detail the percentages that I did. We can discuss this tonight, then I'll take the money out tomorrow. I won't be arguing over text while I'm at work. Basically, he was trying to buy his time because I said I was leaving the next day. And I said, my sister already said she's bringing me to you at noon. I don't have time to play games with you, and I have a plane to catch. We will show up at noon. He said, I also told you to contact me when you were coming. I don't have time for games either. I said, I am here. You said last night you were giving me my money in front of my sister today at noon. He said, you showing up unannounced isn't my problem. And I said, okay. And I told you last night I was here and you agreed to pay me today. I don't see the issue. He said, the issue is you guys not being realistic. You guys keep talking about an agreement that you guys know you didn't stick to. And I said, okay, I'll be at your job at noon to get my money. He said, okay, you'll be leaving empty-handed without an agreement. I said, don't waste my time or my sister's time. Just give me my money so this can all be done and we can go our separate ways. He said, that is why I want an agreement. I said, we had an agreement from the start. I'm not going to change it. He said, you guys changed the agreement. I said, we absolutely did not. I said, I will see you today to get my money so our partnership can be finished. I don't know why you want to carry this on. He said, if I don't have an agreement, I will mail a cashier's check by the end of today. I said, no, I want cash like you agreed to. Then he said, then we need an agreement that you have to stick to. I said, I'm not leaving here empty-handed. I came up here to get my money. Bring me what you think I'm owed. Where am I meeting you? I am done playing your games. He said, when you start insulting somebody for doing something that you've never done to you and still continue to insult, I'm not understanding the game. Like, I really had no idea of really what he was talking about there. But I'm like, where are we meeting? He said, you don't want me to waste your sister's time, so I'm not going to have you riding around looking for an argument. I said, I am not. I'm just trying to grab my money and leave. It's simple. Then we can be done with the situation. He said, yeah, I'm sure. Now I know why every time I talk to your son, he does the angry thing because he hears the shit talking about Pop. I said, first, my son always does that. That's just what he does as a toddler. And I said, this isn't about the kids. This is between us. Where am I meeting you? And I'm just like, first off, I'm not like you. I know that kids are supposed to be kids. I would never, ever bring my children into this situation and tell them what's going on. That is not a kid's responsibility to go through all of that. So then he goes, I also don't remember an agreement that said I was going to do 80% of the work or find 100% of the contractors, 100% of the deals, and be the only one at the house almost every single day. And I'm like, okay. Which was just funny to me because he thinks that he did all these things, but I'm like, I laid the flooring, I painted, my husband did the roof, we did everything. But he was just like, come up with a number that you're willing to sign off on and I'll get back to you. I might just have you meet me at the bank. And I said, I told you my number. I don't know what your number is. Bring me what you think I deserve. Because at this point, I'm like, I'm not leaving without something. So I said, okay, then I'll meet you at your bank at noon. He said, well, your number doesn't even make sense. All you have to do is please look at the closing papers, add the fees, and any and all repairs. And I don't want to hear you're only responsible for 1 year. I said, okay, where's your bank? Because I'm like, what closing papers? You never sent me any closing papers. You never sent me the fees. You never sent me any receipts or anything for repairs. So what am I even supposed to be looking at? You want me to look at all these things and make an educated thing, but you're not telling me any information. You're withholding all this information and just saying, tell me what you deserve. So I'm like, okay, where's your bank? And he goes, Jeff said, you guys are only responsible for the year that the tenant was there. So none of that even makes sense and all these things. So I said, okay, I'll see you at noon. Is that at noon at your bank? Is that what you're agreeing to? He said, give me a number, then I'll tell you where to meet me. Now I have to work. I said, I already did. He said, not agreed. I said, so what is the number that you're going to give me? He said, the one we agree upon. I said, okay, so then where am I meeting you? He said, give me a number and then I'll tell you where to meet me. No more circles. So I just threw out another number that was unreasonably low. And then he countered with just an insulting number. And then he countered with an even lower number. And I'm like, I don't care anymore. Just give me my money so we can be done. And then he gave me a lower number. And I'm like, where am I meeting you? He said, I'll text you in a little bit, and then gave me a different number. He said, because you threatened me with legal action, I'm going to need you to sign off on an agreed amount before money exchanges hands. I said, give me X amount of money today. And then he started going lower and higher and then like going all over the place with all these numbers. So we went back and forth a few times, probably like 6 or 7 times of a number. And then he said, do you agree to signing off that you're 100% responsible for the taxes on the money, the deposit for the tenant, that you are paid in full as to the agreement on the house and all these things, and don't hold him liable for any of the costs or the expenses pertaining to the house and all this stuff. And I'm like, where am I meeting you? He said, so you're not willing to sign off. I said, what am I signing? Because he just texted me that. He's like, did you not read the text? I'm like, why would I pay 100% of the taxes? I paid the deposit back to the tenant already. And he's like, 100% of the taxes on the money that I'm giving you and all these things. So I'm like, why would I have to pay taxes on the money that you give me? Taxes came out at closing. So like everything he was saying just didn't really make sense to me. He said, not the house taxes. There was no real estate tax taken out. So if there's any other tax that pertains to the money I gave you, you would be 100% responsible for the tax. And I'm like, what do you mean there's no real estate tax taken out? Like that makes no sense. But he basically said, if there's no tax in the future, then there's nothing to worry about. And I was like, okay, then you're not responsible for any future taxes. I said, I'm not paying for you to take money out of your account. Like, so I wasn't sure if he needed to pay a fee or something like that. And he's like, on my money, yes. I said, if your bank is taxing you to take out the money, he said, the bank doesn't tax it. The government does. Banks charge fees. And I'm like, okay, I'm so just exhausted with this conversation. I'm just like, okay, so you were already charged all the fees up front when you got the money. And if you're giving me cash because I told you not to deposit my money, then okay, what fees or taxes are you speaking of? He's like, neither do I. But if something arises, you would pay your part. If any taxes or fees arise in the future, you would be liable for your part. So I'm like, yeah, okay, sure, I'll pay my taxes on my part. So where am I meeting you? At your job site or at the bank? I said, meet me at your bank with the money at 11 and then have the money in front of me and I'll sign. So he sent me the PDF of a contract that he had written up. And so I told him, I'm not signing anything until I get the money and it's counted at the bank. He said, that's not how it works. You sign and then you receive. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, again, just give me my friggin' money so I can just end this relationship with you because this is just tiring. So then he asked me what our ETA was. I said 10 minutes. And then he's like, a little heads up, I'm on my way would have helped. I said at 11 o'clock, I'd be there. He's like, you say a lot of things. I'm here. Were you joking about 11 o'clock? And I'm like, my sister took a wrong turn, so we're behind a little bit of traffic. And he's like, okay, well, you're just going to have to come back. And I'm like, no, we're right down the road. Like, we're less than 2 miles away. And we got stuck at a light. So he's like, what color car are you coming in? I told him my sister's car. And then we did the exchange and I signed the contract. And that was the last interaction that I had with my dad for almost exactly 4 years. From January 27th, 2021 until December 2024. And my dad said, I told you, you would be the first person to know if we got an offer. After a few days of going back and forth and my dad ensuring me that there was no way that he was selling the house, even when we were informed that we were just waiting on a notarized paper from my mom. Again, my mom knew my dad was selling as well, even though I reached out to her and asked her, and she swore on the lives of all of her children she had no idea. Just before closing day, I disclosed the information that I had, and my dad tried to convince me that I had no idea what I was talking about, and if somehow he was selling the house, it was because he signed a paper that he thought was a scam. Again, why would you sign a paper that you think is a scam, especially for my dad who is so beyond cautious with everything? I have no idea. I was just completely taken back at the thought that he thought that I was just going to fall for all of those lies. And the continuance and avoidance of answering any of my questions, just the rude comments on how I had no idea what was going on or what I was talking about. When I asked, when would I have my half of the money, he just kept responding with portion. I will bring you your portion. He just kept avoiding saying half. When I flew to New Jersey and confronted my dad, he said to meet him at his work the next day and that he would bring me my money. He texted me later that and said, give me a reasonable number, a number you think that you deserve. It was just so exhausting. And at that point, like I said, I didn't care what he gave me at that point because it didn't matter what I agreed or said. He just kept going down and down and down in the number. And again, like I said, I flew all the way up there. I wasn't leaving empty handed. And to be completely honest, it would not have mattered if we made $10 off of this house or if we made 100,000 million cajillion billion dollars off of the house, okay? The fact of the matter is that he consistently lied to me, tried to play mind games with me, manipulated words, told half truths, and tried to convince me that I had no idea what I was talking about, saying that I don't know where you're getting your facts and information from, trying to make me believe that I was delusional once again. And his excuse for not giving me half of the money was him just saying that I never did as much work as I said I was going to do, and that my husband didn't do as much work that he said he was going to do, and that all of these random fees and fines that he was paying, and everything was just so secretive and incomplete. But the reality is, the consistent lies and deceit were enough for me to put up a permanent boundary with my dad. I was never delusional. My intuition and the messages that I received were 100% factual. The way that I was told things would play out by my spiritual team, they played out exactly how the messages came through to me. And it was in that moment that I knew that I could not push my intuition off or ignore it anymore. It's so funny because so many people say, you cut your dad off because of money. And, again, I just have to laugh because God only knows what he's telling other people. And that's okay. That has nothing to do with me. He had told many people that the reason he didn't give me more money was because he got fined for not having like the grass cut on some of his lots that he owned in Texas when he was living in New Jersey and for some random things. But when I asked why he thought I deserved less, I was never given a list until way after everything went down. And most of it didn't even make sense. Again, I just laugh at the grass vines because, for one, they had nothing to ever do with when we were building the house or anything like that. I also cut my dad's lots, many of them, multiple lots, for years. And I never asked for a dime. He got a fine one time because my mower broke and I wasn't going to push mow half an acre being 9 months pregnant. Remember, it was just me and my kids. I was pregnant. And I would be loading up my lawnmower using my gas, putting my lawnmower onto my trailer, cutting multiple of his lots. And again, I never asked for a dime. The whole time my parents lived with us, never asked for a dime. When we moved into the duplex, I paid the bills. I had always been over giving and overextending to help my parents out, always at the cost of my own well-being and the well-being of my own family. Yet to him, he believes that I cut him out because of money, or at least that's what he tells everybody. Not anything had anything to do with anything he's ever done. No, of course not. All of the memories I have in my head are just fallacies and delusional anyway. Just like my business that I created, the business of helping others heal. To my dad, energy healing is a fake business based on false beliefs designed to scam people out of their money. Probably like that scam document that he signed to sell the house from under me. He has said that anyone who falls for that spiritual stuff is delusional. And in case you guys haven't caught on yet or noticed, the whole world is delusional except for my father. But that is completely okay because I trusted the universe and I started my business when we moved to Maryland. Again, against all the criticism, the mockery, and the hate for what I do, I still opened a small office and my life was so beautiful. It was quiet and drama free. I connected even closer with my siblings and with their significant others, as well as my nieces and my nephews. It was such a beautiful time. I felt in control of my life and at peace in my life. My kids finally felt at home and integrated within the community. But, of course, Uncle Sam had other plans. My husband had gotten orders, and my spiritual team told me that I had to move to Wyoming because it was an important part of my journey and that if I wanted to grow, I had to go out there. So I trusted. We moved out to Wyoming to start over yet again. I opened a downtown office for about 6 months, but was only able to work out of it for about 2.5 months. I started seeing new clients, teaching meditations at the local coffee shops, and on base for resiliency days. Things started to pick up surprisingly quick. And then I got a call, a devastating call from my sister. A call that we will go into detail about next week. So if you thought this conversation was a shock, then I'm not too sure you're going to be able to handle what we're going to be going over next week. Ultimately, though, my journey so far has been one of resilience and transformation. I learned to embrace my spirituality, my gifts, and really step into my authentic self while also holding very firm to my beliefs and my boundaries. Again, next week, we're going to be diving into the challenges that I faced after moving to Wyoming, how I continued to grow spiritually, and exactly what happened when I got that phone call from my sister. Until then, remember, healing is a journey. It's not a destination. It doesn't matter where you've been, as long as you're taking steps to get to where you want to go along your path. And you have to trust in yourself as well as Source. Thank you all for walking my path with me so far and being a part of my journey. Until next time.